I thus used this limited time to make a few freewheeling observations animated by the state of our democratic project in this very country. And into it read my concern for global state of human rights across the world. On our land lives a post-conflict society. Now the genesis of our strife was colonial rule and land dispossession. Our history was peppered with the sprinkling of slavery, which all mutated into exclusion and oppression based on race, on class, on gender, and a host of other prejudices like sexual orientation and religion. It took the better part of 350 years to fight back and to overthrow significant elements of that oppression. And that gave us a long culture of struggle and of resistance against injustice. From the 1990s, we gathered around the peace table and we wrote down with remarkable clarity our notion of a just society. It will be premised on the will of the people under a supreme constitution containing universal fundamental rights and freedoms which are justiciable before courts. Our society was meant to be inclusive, to be tolerant of diversity, and to be socially just. We did not only want to shut the door firmly on apartheid, but we also sought to reverse the devastation of apartheid by imposing justiciable socio-economic rights and authorizing certain remedial and restitutionary measures to restore equity. In short, ours was meant to be a transformative constitution. Or in the words of Nelson Mandela, it was meant to be a constitution under which never and never again will one person oppress another. And then what happened? What went wrong? Did we live happily forever thereafter? Well, in all fairness, we had a bit of happiness, but also much sadness. And we should be the first to recognize that we do and have generated a lot of sadness. Despite our long cultural struggle and clear notions of a just society. The good news first. We managed a treacherous transition and set up ground rules that will underscore our democratic ethos, public morality and governance. We've inducted a representative democracy premised on proportional representation on a closed party list. We've established and maintained a functional democratic state with all the customary markers, including multi-parties, regular elections, the rule of law and separation of powers. Our parliamentary system functions, certainly more at an elective than at a participatory level. In some parts of our country, local government functions and renders basic services to local commands. Our fiscal and state treasury functions and are not shabby, and our revenue collection is world-class. Our courts are independent and are effective. Our institutions of democracy, and they include a wide variety, Auditor General, Electoral Commission, Human Rights Commission, Public Prosecutor, have teeth and often they bite, they do their work. We can gladly boast of a robust civil society in this country that takes up social causes around just every social concern. For that, we are lucky. We have civil society campaigns around land and land inequity, on the defense of the Constitution and of the rule of law. We are blessed with continuing battles against private and public corruption, on electoral probity. We have successful campaigns around HIV/AIDS, access to healthcare, on gender violence and access to equality, education, free expression. And indeed, in our country, we are blessed with a fair share of dissent. Our people come into the streets and they protest loud and openly, and particularly the unemployed and poor people in our land don't keep quiet, they protest. We have a strong labor movement, although not now hobbled by economic stagnation and large layoff of workers. Our press is free. It is prime, it is fearless, it is unbending. I want to add, none of our citizens has been jailed only for political, religious, and other beliefs. With high levels of violent crime, which are tormenting all of us, but at least we don't yet have a open civil war. We don't yet have genocide and terrorist attack. So, having heard that, you would know that our transition has not been in vain. And indeed, it has yielded some measure of democratic dividend. But now here comes the bad news. The wrinkles of our democratic transition. When our constitution was negotiated, the parties skirted around the need for social change. The negotiators did not stare in the eye the historical and structural inequality in our economy. This meant the rich will stay rich, the skilled will stay skilled, the poor will stay poor, and the poor will stay unskilled. There was no pact on how to achieve equality and social justice that the Constitution promised in such clear terms. Instead, the Constitution imposed qualified duties on the state to facilitate access to social goods, like health, housing, water, education, and social grants. But these socio-economic entitlements were premised on and limited to state transfers, as and when funds were available. So on their face, the protections were praiseworthy and promised a state-sponsored reduction of poverty. But in practice, socio-economic rights did not speak to how to restructure the economy in a way that will render more and more of us productive, and arrangements which are more inclusive. The consequence is this devastating inequality. Now, the absence of a social pact was far-reaching omission, given the inequality embedded in the social structure of the country at the start of the transition. I'm not debating whether, at the time of the negotiations, given the balance of forces, a radical social pact was feasible. It was probably not, short of outright military conquest. I'm simply observing the plain and painful fact that the existing and insular economic arrangements survived the transfer of political power. This simply meant ownership of productive assets and many other investments that are likely to grow the economy, and management prowess, by and large, remained unaltered. So in many ways, race and class coincided. Now, from these observations that I'm ending, Fatima, from what I've just said flows the following. Only in summary. One, a long protected ethos of struggle for liberation is helpful, but is not a sufficient precondition or antidote against misrule, against misuse of public resources, and abandonment of developmental goals. Two, I want to observe, mere left-wing and progressive rhetoric often is a decoy away from abuse of power and undemocratic practice. We must rather look at what the state actually does, how public and private power is deployed in a society, and what is its response in the terrain of fundamental rights and freedoms. In other words, what is the level of risk that the state and other wielders of public power pose to fundamental rights and freedoms? And once states get into a corner, telltales begin to come up and show, starting with an attempt to repress free expression. You find journalists who don't comply. You found purveyors of criticism and try and shut them down and denigrate agents of an open and just society. Another lesson for us, human rights activists in this part of the world, the wonderful constitution and so too democratic entitlements of fundamental rights and freedoms call for constant, ongoing and thorough surveillance. Mere achievement of your idealized blueprint hardly suffices. Next lesson, civil society is totally indispensable at home and abroad, and that's why you are indeed rock stars. But retrogressive and undemocratic regimes quickly want to destroy civil society. And even our own government, with respect, Deputy Minister, is not immune from this ailment. Many questions would arise. Who is funding organs of civil society? What is the overall regime change plan for them? And suddenly incumbency suggests that organs of civil society are at risk. I was dubbed counter-revolutionary, being a good judge, doing as well as I could on the bench. Counter-revolutionary, when I believed I was a super-revolutionary. Courts and other institutions of democratic policing are useful, but must remain robust and open to activism. I can take a better part of your morning to tell you of the activism of our court and how we've been deeply thankful to civil society for raising issues about gender equality, about homophobic struggles, around landless people, around patriarchy, around denigration and exclusion of women, protection of children. We have on many occasions ordered the government to provide treatment to HIV patients. We reminded the executive of their duty to provide housing. We've mediated differences around rampant eviction of poor people and rural occupiers of land which is said not to be theirs. We have developed quite a proud jurisprudence, for instance, around worker rights, on protection of free expression. Like yourself, to ensure that we hold the feet of those who hold public power to the fire every time they drift away from our common convictions, those things that we have agreed ought to characterize our good society. In closing, let me add that quite often we have been called upon to police corrupt practices, corrupt tender practices within state power. and the courts have not hesitated. Or sometimes we've been invited to enforce our obligations in international law. We can't scrum around dictators who refuse to be held accountable on the African continent or where else. We ought to be on the side of the victims, because we were victims for over 350 years. We have to be on the side of activists, civil society around the world, and that is what we have chosen clearly in our constitution. And lastly, and more very importantly, I think we must, again, we South Africans and around the world, remind ourselves that the ultimate and true vanguard of any democracy must be the people themselves. They have brains that work, they are not stupid, they can think, and their voices should be heard. So we as civil society have to urge the people themselves not to disempower them so that their voices could be heard. That was a snippet of what I wanted to say to you this morning. And I say it with great gratitude, having served in the terrain as a judge of our constitutional court for 15 years in helping to try and make our vision of an idealized society a reality.